When Michael Jordan's former high school rival found himself drowning in debt and facing complete financial ruin, nobody expected the basketball legend to step in. What happened next left everyone speechless and reminded the world why true champions are defined not just by their victories on the court, but by their character of it. Comment where you're watching from today, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about rivalry, redemption, and the power of unexpected compassion. The autumn air in Wilmington, North Carolina, carried the weight of memories as it swept through the empty corridors of Laney High School. The gymnasium, once filled with the thunderous cheers of Friday night basketball games, now stood silent in the late afternoon light. Dust particles danced in the golden rays that streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the championship. Banners that hung like silent witnesses to glory days long past. Among those banners, one name appeared more frequently than any other, a name that would go on to become synonymous with excellence itself. But this story isn't about that name. Not entirely. In a modest apartment across town, Tyler Donaldson sat hunched over a kitchen table covered in unpaid bills, foreclosure notices, and legal documents that seemed to multiply like a spreading disease. The man who had once been considered Michael Jordan's equal on the hardwood now found himself facing a reality far removed from the dreams they had both chased as teenagers. His weathered hands, once capable of threading impossible passes and sinking clutch shots, now trembled slightly as he sorted through the mounting evidence of his financial collapse. Tyler had always been the one they said could match Jordan shot for shot, move for move. During their junior year at Laney High, scouts would arrive not just to watch the future NBA legend, but to witness the epic battles between two young men who seemed destined for greatness. Tyler Donaldson wasn't just Michael Jordan's rival. He was his equal, perhaps his superior on any given night. College recruiters whispered his name in the same breath as Jordan's, and for good reason. The memories felt like artifacts from another lifetime now. Tyler remembered the way the crowd would rise to their feet when he and Jordan matched each other, basket for basket. The electricity in the air when two forces of nature collided on the court. Those were the nights when basketball felt less like a game and more like poetry in motion, when every possession carried the weight of destiny and every shot seemed to echo with possibility. But destiny, Tyler had learned, was a fickle thing. The knee injury came during his senior year, a devastating blow that arrived without warning during what should have been a routine practice. The sound of ligaments tearing echoed through the gym like a gunshot, followed by a silence so profound it seemed to swallow the very air from the room. In that instant, Tyler's path to basketball immortality didn't just change, it ended. The scholarships that had seemed guaranteed vanished overnight. The NBA dreams that had felt inevitable became nothing more than cruel mirages in the desert of reality. While Michael Jordan went on to conquer the University of North Carolina and eventually the entire basketball world, Tyler Donaldson faded into the background of ordinary life. He took a job at a local manufacturing plant, married his high school sweetheart Stephanie Collins, and tried to build a life away from the spotlight that had once illuminated his every move. For years, it seemed to work. They raised 2 children, bought a modest home, and created the kind of quiet happiness that doesn't make headlines, but sustains the soul. But life, Tyler discovered, had more cruel lessons in store. The manufacturing plant closed when Tyler was 42, a victim of automation and overseas competition. The severance package barely lasted 6 months, and despite his best efforts, finding comparable work proved impossible. His skills were tied to an industry that was disappearing, and his basketball fame had faded so completely that most potential employers didn't even recognize his name. The modest savings they had accumulated evaporated quickly as unemployment stretched from months into years. Stephanie's illness arrived like a second devastating injury, striking without warning and with even more catastrophic consequences. The medical bills began as a trickle, but quickly became a flood that threatened to drown everything they had worked to build. Insurance covered some expenses, but the gaps were enormous, and the specialized treatment Stephanie needed weren't. Considered essential by the bean counters, who made life and death decisions from boardrooms. Far removed from human suffering, Tyler watched helplessly as his wife fought a battle that required weapons he couldn't afford to provide. He sold their car, then their furniture, then anything of value they possessed. He took out loans against their home, then second mortgages, then borrowed against credit cards with interest rates that would have been considered criminal in a more just world. Every day brought new bills and new impossibilities, each one another weight added to a burden that was already crushing his spirit. The house, their last refuge, the place where they had planned to grow old together, now stood as collateral for debts that seemed to multiply faster than Tyler could count them. The foreclosure notice had arrived 3 weeks ago, cold and impersonal in its bureaucratic language, giving them 30 days to find money they didn't have or face eviction from the only stability they had left. Stephanie had passed away 2 months earlier, her battle finally ending in a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and defeat. Tyler held her hand as she slipped away, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep about honoring her memory and finding a way to rebuild. But sitting now in their empty apartment, surrounded by the detritus of a life falling apart, those promises felt hollow and impossible. The irony wasn't lost on him that while his former rival lived in a mansion worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, Tyler couldn't scrape together enough money to keep a roof over his head. He felt no resentment toward Michael Jordan. The man had earned every accolade and every dollar through dedication and talent that few could match. But the contrast between their lives served as a daily reminder of how quickly fortune could change, how thin the line was between success and failure, between remembrance and obscurity. Tyler's children, now adults with families of their own, had offered to help, but they were struggling too. The economic realities of middle-class life in modern America meant that even good, hard-working people often lived paycheck to paycheck, with little room for emergencies, let alone family crises of this magnitude. His son, Jeffrey Larson, worked 2 jobs just to keep his own family afloat, while his daughter, Jennifer Brown, was still paying off student loans that seemed to grow larger despite her regular payments. The silence in the apartment was broken only by the ticking of an old clock that had belonged to Stephanie's grandmother, its steady rhythm marking time toward an uncertain future. Tyler stared at the foreclosure notice again, the legal jargon blurring together as his eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for weeks. In 3 days, representatives from the bank would arrive to formally take possession of the property. After that, Tyler Donaldson, once mentioned in the same breath as the greatest basketball player who ever lived, would officially have nowhere to go. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the oppressive quiet like a blade. Tyler almost didn't answer, assuming it was another creditor or legal representative calling to discuss debts he couldn't pay or deadlines he couldn't meet. But something made him reach for the receiver, perhaps the same instinct that had once helped him anticipate passes and read defensive rotations on the basketball court. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but professional, belonging to someone who identified himself as Daniel Lopez, an attorney calling on behalf of an unnamed client. The man spoke carefully, as if reading from prepared notes, explaining that he represented someone who had learned of Tyler's situation and wished to discuss a potential resolution to his financial difficulties. Tyler's first instinct was suspicion. He had received enough calls from scam artists and predatory lenders to recognize the patterns. But something about this conversation felt different. The attorney wasn't asking for money or personal information. Instead, he was requesting a meeting, suggesting they could discuss options that might help Tyler avoid foreclosure and begin rebuilding his financial stability. Against his better judgment, Tyler agreed to meet the following morning at a small coffee shop downtown, a place that had somehow survived the economic changes that had claimed so many other local businesses. As he hung up the phone, Tyler felt something he hadn't experienced in months, a tiny flicker of hope, fragile as a candle flame in a hurricane, but present nonetheless. He spent the rest of the evening wondering who could possibly have learned about his situation and why they would care enough to intervene. His story hadn't made any newspapers or television broadcasts. His struggles were private, known only to family members and the various professionals who managed his debt and legal troubles. The mystery gnawed at him as he tried to sleep, his mind cycling through possibilities that ranged from the plausible to the impossible. As dawn broke over Wilmington, Tyler prepared for a meeting that could change everything or nothing, carrying with him the cautious optimism of a man who had learned that life's greatest surprises often came disguised as ordinary moments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the downtown streets of Wilmington as Tyler made his way to the coffee shop, each step weighted with the uncertainty that had become his constant companion. The Main Street Cafe occupied a corner building that had weathered decades of economic storms, its brick facade and hand-painted sign speaking to a simpler time when local businesses formed the backbone of American communities. Through the large front windows, Tyler could see the familiar sight of early morning regulars nursing their coffee and reading newspapers, their quiet conversations creating a comforting hum of normalcy. Tyler arrived 15 minutes early. Partly from nervousness and partly from habit, punctuality had been drilled into him during his athletic days when being late meant running extra laps or losing playing time. He chose a table near the back corner, positioning himself where he could observe the entrance while maintaining some privacy for whatever conversation was about to unfold. The coffee shop's atmosphere was warm and inviting, filled with the rich aroma of freshly ground beans and the soft clatter of dishes being prepared for the morning rush. As he waited, Tyler's mind wandered back to the countless mornings he had spent in places just like this during his younger days, when the future seemed limitless and every challenge felt surmountable. He remembered meeting college recruiters over similar cups of coffee, their eyes bright with possibility as they painted pictures of scholarships and championships and professional careers that stretched beyond the horizon. Those conversations had felt like glimpses into a promised land, each one another step toward a destiny that seemed as inevitable as sunrise. The memory brought with it a familiar ache, not just for what he had lost, but for the version of himself who had believed so completely in the certainty of success. That young man would never have imagined sitting in a coffee shop, broke and desperate, waiting for a mysterious benefactor to potentially save him from homelessness. The distance between who he had been and who he had become felt like an ocean of disappointment, each wave another reminder of opportunities missed and dreams deferred. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door chimed softly as a well-dressed man entered the cafe. Daniel Lopez was younger than Tyler had expected, probably in his early 40s, with the kind of confident bearing that suggested success had come naturally to him. He wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of quality without ostentation, and his eyes scanned the room with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly and accurately. When their eyes met, Tyler felt a moment of recognition, not of the man himself, but of the type he represented. This was someone who operated in a world of power and influence, where problems were solved with phone calls and contracts rather than prayers and hope. The attorney approached with measured steps, extending his hand in greeting with the kind of firm handshake that conveyed both professionalism and genuine warmth. "Mr. Donaldson, thank you for meeting with me on such short notice," Daniel said as he settled into the chair across from Tyler. "I know this situation must be confusing, and I appreciate your willingness to hear what I have to say." Tyler studied the man's face, searching for clues about his identity or motivations. "I'll be honest, Mr. Lopez. I'm not sure what this is about, but I'm desperate enough to listen to just about anything at this point." The attorney's expression softened slightly, revealing a humanity beneath the professional demeanor. "I understand you're facing foreclosure, among other financial difficulties. My client learned of your situation and asked me to reach out because they believe you deserve better than what life has dealt you recently." "Your client," Tyler repeated, the words carrying the weight of curiosity and suspicion in equal measure. "And who exactly is this mysterious benefactor? Because if this is some kind of loan shark operation or scam, I should tell you up front that I don't have anything left to lose." Daniel reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder, placing it on the table between them with deliberate care. "This isn't a loan, Mr. Donaldson. It's not a scam, and there are no strings attached, in the traditional sense. My client wishes to remain anonymous for now, but they've authorized me to present you with an offer that could resolve all of your immediate financial problems." Tyler felt his heartbeat quicken as he stared at the folder, afraid to hope, but unable to suppress the possibility that his prayers might actually be answered. "What kind of offer?" "Complete debt forgiveness," Daniel said simply. "Your mortgage, credit card debts, medical bills, legal fees, everything wiped clean with documentation to prove it. Additionally, my client wishes to establish a trust, one that would provide you with a modest but comfortable income for the rest of your life." The words hit Tyler like a physical blow, so unexpected and overwhelming that for a moment he couldn't process their meaning. He had prepared himself for many possibilities during the sleepless hours of the previous night, but this level of generosity seemed to exist beyond the realm of realistic expectations. "I don't understand," Tyler managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would anyone do this for me? I'm nobody special. I'm just a guy who used to play basketball in high school and couldn't make it work afterward." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more intense. "My client doesn't see it that way. They remember you as someone who competed with honor, who faced adversity with dignity, and who deserves recognition for the man you've become, rather than condemnation for the circumstances you've encountered." Tyler's mind raced through the possibilities, trying to identify someone from his past who might possess both the resources and the motivation to offer such extraordinary help. Former teammates were mostly struggling with their own financial challenges. Coaches from his high school days were either retired or had passed away. The few college recruiters he had met were hardly likely to remember him after so many years, let alone feel compelled to rescue him from bankruptcy. "There has to be a catch," Tyler said, voicing the skepticism that years of disappointment had taught him to embrace. "Nobody gives away this kind of money without expecting something in return." The attorney smiled for the first time since their conversation began, and Tyler noticed that it reached his eyes in a way that suggested genuine amusement rather than professional calculation. "There is one condition, though I suspect you'll find it more pleasant than burdensome. My client would like to meet with you personally to discuss not just this financial arrangement, but also some opportunities that might interest you going forward." Tyler felt a mixture of relief and apprehension wash over him. A meeting seemed like a small price to pay for salvation, but the mystery surrounding his benefactor's identity continued to gnaw at him. When and where? "This afternoon, if you're available, 3 o'clock at the Riverside Country Club," Daniel paused, studying Tyler's reaction carefully. "I should mention that my client has requested this meeting take place in a somewhat public setting, around other people who knew you during your basketball days. They believe context will be important for the conversation they want to have." The mention of the country club sent a chill through Tyler's chest. The Riverside Country Club was where Wilmington's elite gathered, where successful businessmen and prominent families socialized away from the scrutiny of ordinary citizens. It was also where many of his former classmates now spent their leisure time, people who had gone on to achieve the kind of success that had eluded him. The prospect of walking into that environment, broke and desperate, felt almost as terrifying as the foreclosure notice itself. "I'm not sure I'm dressed for a place like that," Tyler said, gesturing toward his worn jeans and faded polo shirt. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across the table with practiced discretion. "My client anticipated that concern. There's enough here to purchase appropriate clothing and handle any other preparations you might need for this afternoon." Tyler opened the envelope to find 5 crisp $100 bills, more cash than he had seen in months. The sight of it was simultaneously thrilling and humbling, a reminder of how far he had fallen and how completely he had come to depend on the charity of others. "Mr. Lopez," Tyler said, looking up from the money with eyes that glistened with unshed tears, "I need you to understand something. I've been beaten down pretty thoroughly by life these past few years. I've learned not to trust good news because it usually comes with bad news attached. But right now, sitting here with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. I feel like maybe there's still hope." The attorney nodded solemnly, gathering his papers and preparing to leave. "Hope is exactly what my client wants to restore, Mr. Donaldson. See you at 3 o'clock. As Daniel Lopez walked away, Tyler remained seated at the small table, staring at the envelope and the folder that contained promises almost too good to believe. Around him, the coffee shop continued its morning rhythm, but he felt disconnected from the ordinary world, suspended between despair and possibility, waiting for an afternoon that might change everything. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the towering oak trees that lined the entrance to Riverside Country Club, casting dancing shadows across the perfectly manicured grounds that spoke of wealth and privilege accumulated over generations. Tyler sat in his rented sedan, another expense charged to his mysterious benefactor's account, watching members arrive in luxury vehicles that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Mercedes sedans, BMW convertibles, and sleek Audis glided through the circular drive with practiced ease, their occupants emerging with the casual confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Tyler had spent the morning shopping for appropriate attire, a surreal experience that felt like playing dress-up for a role he didn't understand. The navy blazer and khaki pants he now wore were simple but well-tailored, purchased at a men's store where the salesperson had treated him with polite professionalism despite his obvious nervousness. Looking at himself in the store's mirror, Tyler had been struck by how clothes could transform not just appearance, but posture. He stood straighter, walked with more purpose, even breathed differently in garments that suggested success rather than struggle. But now, sitting outside the country club, those borrowed markers of respectability felt like a costume that might be stripped away at any moment, revealing the fraud beneath. He recognized several faces among the arriving members, former classmates who had gone on to careers in law, medicine, and business, people who moved through the world with the easy grace of those who had never known true want. The thought of walking among them, pretending to belong, made his stomach clench with anxiety. At precisely 3 o'clock, Tyler forced himself to exit the car and approach the club's imposing entrance. The building itself was a monument to old-world elegance, Its colonial architecture and meticulous landscaping designed to convey permanence and exclusivity. The doorman, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, greeted Tyler with the kind of practiced courtesy that suggested years of experience in identifying who belonged and who merely aspired to belong. "Good afternoon, sir. How may I assist?" "You?" "I'm here to meet Daniel Lopez," Tyler replied, his voice steadier than he felt. He said 3 o'clock. The doorman consulted a leather-bound ledger with theatrical precision. "Ah, yes, Mr. Donaldson. Mr. Lopez is waiting for you in the Oak Room. Right this way, please." The interior of the club was even more intimidating than Tyler had imagined, all dark wood paneling and oil paintings of long-dead benefactors whose stern expressions seemed to judge the worthiness of every visitor. The Oak Room was located off the main dining area, its windows overlooking a golf course so perfectly maintained it looked more like a painting than actual grass. Several dozen people were scattered throughout the room, engaged in quiet conversations over cocktails and appetizers, their voices creating a genteel murmur that spoke of deals being made and connections being forged. Daniel Lopez rose from a table near the windows as Tyler approached, but Tyler's attention was immediately drawn to the man sitting across from him. Even with his back turned, there was something familiar about the figure's posture and build, something that triggered a memory Tyler couldn't quite grasp. When the man stood and turned around, Tyler felt the world shift beneath his feet. Michael. Jordan smiled at his former rival with genuine warmth, extending his hand in greeting as if they were old friends meeting for a casual lunch rather than a desperate man encountering his childhood legend under the most improbable circumstances imaginable. "Tyler," Michael said, his voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had made him a leader on the court and in boardrooms around the world. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Tyler stood frozen for a moment, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of the situation. Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan, was standing in front of him, dressed casually in slacks and a polo shirt, looking remarkably normal for someone who existed in Tyler's memory as larger than life itself. The years had been kind to the basketball legend. He appeared healthy and relaxed, with the same intense eyes that had once studied defensive schemes and identified weaknesses in opposing teams. "Michael," Tyler managed to say, finally accepting the offered handshake. I don't understand. What are you doing here?" "I'm the mysterious client Mr. Lopez has been representing," Michael replied with a slight grin. "Though I suppose the mystery is over now. Please, sit down. We have a lot to talk about." Tyler sank into the offered chair, his legs suddenly unsteady, as the full implications of the situation began to register. Around them, other club members continued their conversations, but Tyler could feel curious glances being cast in their direction. The presence of Michael Jordan anywhere was noteworthy. His presence at a country club in their small North Carolina town was unprecedented. "I still don't understand," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. How did you even know about my situation?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more serious. "Small towns have long memories, Tyler. People talk, especially about guys like us who used to battle each other on Friday nights. Word gets around when someone who was once headed for greatness ends up facing hard times." The basketball legend paused, glancing around the room before continuing. "But it was more than just hearing gossip. I've been thinking about you for years, wondering what happened after high school, wondering if you ever got the chance you deserved. When I found out about Stephanie's illness and what it did to your finances, I knew I had to do something." Tyler felt tears threatening to spill over, a combination of gratitude and shame that left him struggling for words. "Michael, I can't accept charity from you. I appreciate the gesture more than you'll ever know, but I have some pride left." "This isn't charity," Michael said firmly. "This is one competitor recognizing another. You think I don't remember those games we played against each other? You think I've forgotten how you pushed me to be better every single time we stepped on the court together?" The memories came flooding back. Epic battles under the lights of high school gymnasiums, nights when the outcome remained in doubt until the final buzzer. Moments when Tyler had outplayed the future NBA superstar and proven himself worthy of standing on the same court. Those games had been the highlight of Tyler's athletic career, the closest he had ever come to basketball immortality. "That was a long time ago," Tyler said quietly. "A lot has changed since then." "Has it?" Michael asked, leaning forward with renewed intensity. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see the same guy who never gave up, who always found a way to compete even when the odds were stacked against him. The only difference is that now you're facing a different kind of opponent." Daniel Lopez, who had remained silent during this exchange, cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should discuss the specifics of the arrangement." Michael nodded, his business demeanor returning. "Tyler, I want to be clear about something. This offer isn't about pity or some misguided attempt to ease my conscience. It's about recognizing talent and potential that got derailed by circumstances. Beyond your control." Tyler looked around the room, noticing that their conversation had attracted more attention from other club members. Several faces were familiar from his high school days. People who had watched him play, who had once considered him a local celebrity. Now they were witnessing his lowest moment, seeing him accept help from someone who had achieved everything Tyler had once dreamed of accomplishing. "There's something else," Michael continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing audience. "This isn't just about paying off your debts. I want to offer you a position with my organization." Tyler's head snapped up, his eyes widening with surprise. "What kind of position?" "Youth Development Coordinator for the Michael Jordan Foundation. We work with at-risk kids throughout North Carolina, providing mentorship and opportunities for young people who might otherwise fall through the cracks. The job would involve traveling to different communities, working with local schools and community centers, helping kids who are facing the same kinds of challenges you've overcome." The offer hit Tyler like a revelation, a possibility he had never considered, but that felt immediately right. Working with young people, sharing the lessons he had learned through both triumph and failure, helping kids navigate the treacherous waters between dreams and reality, it was exactly the kind of purpose he had been searching for without knowing it. "The salary would be comfortable," Michael added, "enough to maintain a decent lifestyle while you get back on your feet, and there would be opportunities for advancement as the program grows." Tyler felt the weight of eyes upon him as other club members realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The conversation between two former rivals had devolved into something larger, a moment that would be retold and remembered long after both men had left the room. "Why me?" Tyler asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You could hire anyone for a job like that. Why offer it to someone who's been out of work for 2 years?" Michael's expression softened, revealing a vulnerability that few people ever saw. "Because you understand failure, Tyler. You know what it feels like to have dreams shattered and to face impossible odds. Most of the kids we work with need someone who's been where they are, someone who can look them in the eye and say, 'I know how hard this is, but there's still hope.'" The truth of those words resonated through Tyler's chest, like a bell being struck. Every disappointment, every setback, every moment of despair he had endured suddenly took on new meaning. His struggles hadn't been meaningless suffering. They had been preparation for a purpose he was only now beginning to understand. "I need time to think about this," Tyler said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew his answer. Michael smiled, the same competitive grin Tyler remembered from their playing days. "Take all the time you need, but remember, some opportunities don't come around twice." As Tyler sat in that elegant room, surrounded by the trappings of success he had never Achieved, he felt something stirring within him that had been dormant for years. It wasn't just hope, it was purpose, direction, the sense that his story wasn't ending, but beginning a new chapter that might be even more meaningful than the one he had originally planned to write. The weight of Michael Jordan's offer settled over Tyler like a warm blanket, providing comfort he hadn't felt in years, while simultaneously overwhelming him with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Around them, the Oak Room continued its gentle hum of refined conversation, but Tyler felt as though he and Michael existed in a bubble separate from the rest of the world, two former competitors reconnecting across the vast distance of time and circumstance. "I have to ask," Tyler said, his voice still carrying traces of disbelief, "how long have you been planning this? This can't be something you decided overnight." Michael's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the question. "I've been keeping tabs on you for about 5 years now, ever since I heard through the grapevine that you were struggling after the plant closed. At first, I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. We barely knew each other beyond those games we played. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those games meant something. They shaped both of us in ways we probably didn't understand at the time." Tyler found himself transported back to those Friday nights under the lights, when the gym would be packed with screaming fans and the air would crackle with electricity. He remembered the way Michael would study him during warm-ups, analyzing his movements and tendencies with the same intensity he would later bring to NBA championships. But there had been mutual respect there too, an acknowledgement that they were witnessing something special in each other. "You made me better," Michael continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality that seemed at odds with his public persona. "Every time we played against each other, I had to dig deeper, find another level I didn't know existed." That's not something you forget, Tyler. That's not something you walk away from when someone who helped shape you is in trouble. Daniel Lopez, who had been quietly observing the reunion, leaned forward slightly. "If I may interject, there are some practical matters we should discuss regarding the debt forgiveness. The paperwork is already prepared. We just need your signature to begin the process." Tyler looked at the attorney, then back at Michael, still struggling to accept the reality of what was being offered. "This is really happening, isn't it? You're really going to pay off everything?" "It's already done," Michael replied matter-of-factly. "The money was transferred this morning. Your mortgage company will receive the payment tomorrow, along with instructions to release the lien on your property. Credit card companies, medical billing agencies, everyone you owe money to will be contacted by the appropriate representatives." The casual way Michael discussed such a life-changing sum of money served as a stark reminder of the different worlds they now inhabited. For Tyler, the debts represented an insurmountable mountain of obligation that had consumed every waking moment. For Michael, they were apparently little more than a line item in a larger ledger, easily addressed with a few phone calls and electronic transfers. "I don't know what to say," Tyler admitted, feeling the inadequacy of language to express the magnitude of his gratitude. "Thank you seems too small for something like this." "Don't thank me yet," Michael said with a slight smile. "Wait until you see what this job involves. You'll be earning every penny, I promise you that." As if summoned by the mention of work, a woman approached their table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. She appeared to be in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit that spoke of both professionalism and authority. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob that framed intelligent brown eyes, and when she smiled, Tyler could see the warmth beneath her executive demeanor. "Tyler, I'd like you to meet Amy Guerra, the director of our foundation's youth programs," Michael said, rising to greet the newcomer. "Amy, this is Tyler Donaldson, the man I've been telling you about." Amy extended her hand with a firm grip that conveyed both strength and welcome. "Mr. Donaldson, it's a pleasure to meet you. Michael has spoken very highly of your potential. Contributions to our program. Tyler stood awkwardly, still adjusting to the surreal nature of being introduced as a valuable addition to anything, let alone an organization bearing Michael Jordan's name. Please call me Tyler, and I have to admit I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this. Perfectly understandable, Amy replied, settling into a chair that Daniel quickly provided. What we're proposing isn't a typical career transition. But from everything Michael has told me about your background and character, I believe you're exactly what our program needs. She opened a leather portfolio and withdrew several documents, spreading them across the table with practiced efficiency. Let me give you a clearer picture of what the Youth Development Coordinator position would entail. You'd be working primarily with teenagers aged 14 to 18, kids who are at critical junctures in their lives. Many of them come from single-parent households, economically disadvantaged communities, or situations where positive male role models are scarce. Tyler studied the papers, which included program descriptions, testimonials from previous participants, and statistical data about outcomes and success rates. The scope of the Foundation's work was impressive. They operated in over 30 communities across North Carolina, reaching thousands of young people annually through mentorship programs, academic support, and life skills training. Your role would involve visiting these communities on a rotating basis, Amy continued, spending time with the kids, sharing your experiences, and helping them develop both practical skills and the kind of resilience necessary to overcome obstacles. We found that our most effective coordinators are people who have faced significant challenges themselves and can speak authentically about both failure and recovery. The word recovery resonated through Tyler's consciousness like a tuning fork. For the first time in years, he began to see his struggles not as evidence of personal failure, but as qualifications for a different kind of success. Every setback, every disappointment, every moment of despair had taught him lessons that could potentially help young people navigate their own difficulties. There's something else, Michael added, his voice taking on a more serious tone. A lot of these kids are dealing with issues that go beyond poverty or academic struggles. Some come from homes where addiction or violence are daily realities. Others are aging out of foster care systems, with no support networks to help them transition to independence. They need someone who understands that life doesn't always follow the script we write for ourselves. Tyler felt a deep stirring of recognition, remembering his own teenage years when his future had seemed so certain, so clearly mapped out toward basketball stardom and everything that was supposed to follow. The contrast between that young man's confidence and his current situation was stark, but perhaps that contrast was exactly what would make him effective in this role. "What happened to you?" Amy said gently, as if reading his thoughts. "The injury, the lost opportunities, the financial struggles, none of that makes you less qualified for this position. It makes you more qualified. These kids need to see that setbacks don't define a person's worth, that there are multiple paths to a meaningful life." Around them, Tyler became aware that their conversation was drawing increasing attention from other club members. Several people had approached nearby tables, ostensibly to greet friends, but clearly hoping to overhear the discussion between the basketball legend and his mysterious companion. Tyler recognized Greg Daniels, a former classmate, who now owned a successful insurance agency, and Christina Meyer, who had become a prominent local attorney. Their presence served as a reminder of the audience that would witness whatever decision he made. "I have one concern," Tyler said, looking directly at Michael. "People are going to say I got this job because of our history, that it's charity disguised as employment. How do I deal with that?" Michael's expression hardened slightly, revealing the competitive fire that had driven him to 6 NBA championships. "Tyler, let me tell you something I learned a long time ago. People will always find reasons to diminish Your accomplishments, especially if they're dealing with their own insecurities or failures. The only opinion that matters is your own, and the only measure of success that counts is the impact you have on the kids you're trying to help. Amy nodded in agreement. We don't hire people because of their connections or their stories. We hire them because we believe they can make a difference. The fact that you and Michael have history isn't a liability. It's an asset that demonstrates the kind of lasting relationships and mutual respect that we want to model for young people. Tyler looked around the room once more, taking in the faces of people who had known him during his brief moment of local fame and who were now witnessing what could be interpreted as either his redemption or his acceptance of charity. But as he met their gazes, he realized that their opinions had lost much of their power over him. The man who had sat in his apartment 3 days earlier, surrounded by foreclosure notices and unpaid bills, had been paralyzed by shame and the fear of judgment. The man sitting in this chair, being offered a chance to rebuild his life while helping others rebuild theirs, felt something different stirring within him: purpose, determination, and the beginning of restored self-respect. When would I start? Tyler asked, surprising himself with the decisiveness in his voice. Michael and Amy exchanged a look of satisfaction, as if they had been waiting for exactly that question. 2 weeks, Amy replied. That gives you time to get your personal affairs in order and complete our orientation program. We'd start you off with visits to 3 communities: Fayetteville, Rocky Mount, and Asheville, working with established program coordinators who can show you the ropes. Tyler felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, the first genuine expression of happiness he had experienced in months. Then I guess I better start preparing for a new career. As the 3 of them began discussing details of salary, benefits, and training schedules, Tyler became aware that something fundamental had shifted inside him. The desperate man who had entered this room an hour earlier was being replaced by someone with hope, purpose, and the beginning of a plan for the future. It wasn't the future he had originally envisioned for himself, but it was a future worth embracing. Word of the meeting at Riverside Country Club spread through Wilmington like wildfire, carried by the whispered conversations of club members who had witnessed something extraordinary unfold before their eyes. By evening, the story had been shared in dozens of living rooms, retold over dinner tables, and discussed in hushed tones at local restaurants. The basic facts remained consistent. Michael Jordan had personally intervened to rescue his former high school rival from financial ruin. But the details grew more elaborate with each telling, taking on the mythical quality that small towns reserve for their most compelling legends. Tyler returned to his apartment that evening to find his phone ringing incessantly, the caller ID displaying names he hadn't seen in years. Former classmates, distant relatives, and old acquaintances had somehow learned of his changed circumstances and were calling to congratulate him, offer their own stories of hardship, or simply satisfy their curiosity about what it felt like to be saved by a global icon. He let most of the calls go to voicemail, not yet ready to process the attention that his sudden reversal of fortune had generated. The silence of his apartment felt different now, charged with possibility rather than weighted with despair. The same foreclosure notices still sat on his kitchen table, but they had been transformed from death sentences into historical artifacts, evidence of a chapter that was ending rather than a story that was concluding. Tyler moved through his familiar space with new awareness, seeing not the remnants of a life falling apart, but the foundation upon which something better could be built. He spent the evening reading through the materials Amy Guerra had provided, absorbing information about the Foundation's programs and methodologies. The testimonials from former participants were particularly compelling. Young people who had found direction and purpose through mentorship, who had overcome seemingly impossible odds to build successful lives. Tyler found himself imagining similar conversations with teenagers he hadn't yet met, picturing the moment when a discouraged kid might realize that setbacks weren't permanent and that failure could be transformed into wisdom. The next morning brought a different kind of awakening. Tyler's phone rang at 7 o'clock, displaying a number he didn't recognize, but which carried a local area code. When he answered, the voice on the other end belonged to Jonathan Thomas, a reporter from the Wilmington Star-News who had somehow learned about the previous day's events. "Mr. Donaldson, I'm calling about your meeting with Michael Jordan yesterday. I understand he's made you a rather extraordinary offer." Tyler felt his stomach tighten with anxiety. The prospect of his story becoming public news was both thrilling and terrifying, a validation of his worthiness for attention, coupled with the fear that scrutiny might reveal inadequacies he preferred to keep private. "I'm not sure I'm ready to talk to reporters," Tyler replied carefully. "This is all very new, and I need time to process everything that's happened." "I understand your reluctance," Jonathan continued, his voice carrying the practiced persistence of someone accustomed to reluctant sources. "But this is an incredible story of redemption and generosity. People need to hear about the kind of man Michael Jordan really is, and they need to understand that second chances are possible even when things seem hopeless." The reporter's words struck a chord that Tyler hadn't expected. Perhaps there was value in sharing his experience, not for the attention it might bring him personally, but for the hope it might offer to others facing similar struggles. How many people were sitting in their own apartments right now, surrounded by unpaid bills and foreclosure notices, convinced that their situations were hopeless? How many had given up on the possibility that life could surprise them with unexpected grace? "Give me a day to think about it," Tyler said. "If I decide to talk, you'll be the first person I call." After hanging up, Tyler realized that his story was no longer entirely his own. By accepting Michael's help, he had become part of a larger narrative about forgiveness, second chances, and the responsibility that successful people bear toward those who are struggling. The weight of that realization was both humbling and energizing, adding another layer of meaning to the opportunity he had been given. The morning mail brought the first tangible evidence of his transformed circumstances. Among the usual collection of bills and advertisements was an overnight envelope from Daniel Lopez's law firm, containing official documentation of debt forgiveness from his mortgage company. The language was formal and bureaucratic, but the practical effect was miraculous. His home was now owned free and clear, released from the burden of debt that had threatened to destroy everything he had left. Tyler sat at his kitchen table, holding the document with trembling hands as the full magnitude of his liberation began to sink in. 3 days earlier, he'd been counting down hours until eviction. Now he owned his home outright, with no monthly payments to make and no fear of losing the roof over his head. The transformation was so complete and sudden that it felt almost surreal, like waking up from a nightmare to discover that the terror had been nothing more than a product of his sleeping mind. A knock at his door interrupted his reverie. Through the peephole, Tyler could see Gary Grant, his next-door neighbor, and one of the few people who had known the full extent of his financial troubles. Gary was a retired electrician who had watched Tyler's struggles with the kind of quiet concern that characterized good neighbors, offering occasional help with small repairs and sometimes leaving casseroles on Tyler's doorstep during the worst periods. "I heard something interesting about you yesterday," Gary said when Tyler opened the door, his weathered face creased with what might have been either confusion or admiration. "Something about Michael Jordan and the country club." Tyler invited his neighbor inside, grateful for the opportunity to share his news with someone who would understand its significance. Gary listened intently as Tyler recounted the previous day's events, his eyes widening with each detail of the extraordinary meeting and its life-changing consequences. "I'll be damned," Gary said when Tyler finished his account. In 40 years of living next door to various neighbors, I've never heard anything like that. You must be feeling like you won the lottery. Better than the lottery, Tyler replied. This comes with a purpose, a chance to do something meaningful with the second chance I've been given. Gary nodded thoughtfully. Your wife would be proud, you know. Stephanie always said you had more to offer the world than you realized. Maybe this is your chance to prove her right. The mention of Stephanie brought a familiar ache to Tyler's chest, but it was tempered now by the sense that her memory could be honored through the work he was about to undertake. She had always believed in his potential, even during the darkest periods of their financial struggle. Perhaps this opportunity was not just Michael's gift to him, but somehow her gift as well, delivered through channels that transcended the ordinary boundaries of possibility. The rest of the morning brought a steady stream of visitors and phone calls. Holly Humphrey, who had been Tyler's lab partner in high school chemistry, stopped by to express her amazement at his good fortune. Dennis Porter, a former teammate from their basketball days, called to reminisce about old games and express his happiness that Tyler was finally getting the break he deserved. Each conversation reinforced the sense that his story was becoming part of the community's collective memory, a tale that would be told and retold for years to come. But it was the afternoon call from Jeffrey Larson, Tyler's son, that brought the most emotional satisfaction. Jeffrey had been working double shifts at his job, trying to help his father while supporting his own young family, and the relief in his voice was palpable when Tyler explained that the financial crisis was over. "Dad, I can't believe this is real," Jeffrey said, his voice thick with emotion. "When you called this morning, I thought maybe you were having some kind of breakdown. Michael Jordan doesn't just show up and solve people's problems." "Apparently, sometimes he does," Tyler replied, still marveling at the impossibility of his own words. "But son, the important thing isn't just that the money problems are solved. It's that I have a chance to do something meaningful again, to feel like my life has purpose." Jeffrey was quiet for a moment before responding. "You know what the best part of this is, Dad? It's hearing hope in your voice again. For the past 2 years, every time we talked, I could hear how much you were hurting, how lost you felt. You sound like yourself again." That evening, Tyler walked through his neighborhood with new eyes, seeing familiar streets and houses as if for the first time. The modest homes and well-maintained yards spoke of working-class pride and community solidarity, values that would serve him well in his new role with the foundation. These were the kinds of neighborhoods where many of the kids he would be working with lived, places where dreams were often constrained by economic reality, but where character was forged through struggle and mutual support. As the sun set over Wilmington, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed particularly vivid, Tyler felt the settling peace of a man who had found his direction after years of wandering. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he began preparing for a career he had never imagined, working with young people who needed exactly the kind of guidance that his own struggles had equipped him to provide. But tonight, for the first time, in longer than he could remember, Tyler Donaldson went to sleep without fear, surrounded by the quiet comfort of hope, restored and purpose rediscovered. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The following weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation as Tyler immersed himself in the orientation process for his new position with the Michael Jordan Foundation. The foundation's headquarters in Charlotte buzzed with purposeful activity, its modern offices filled with dedicated professionals who had devoted their careers to youth development and community outreach. Tyler found himself surrounded by social workers, educators, and former athletes who shared a common commitment to helping young people navigate the challenges of growing up in an increasingly complex world. Amy Guerra proved to be an exceptional mentor, guiding Tyler through the intricacies of adolescent psychology, community engagement strategies, and the delicate art of earning trust from teenagers who had learned to be suspicious of adult authority figures. During his first week of training, Tyler participated in role-playing exercises where he practiced responding to various scenarios he might encounter in the field. Angry young men whose fathers had abandoned them, teenage girls aging out of foster care with nowhere to go, kids whose academic potential was being undermined by chaotic home environments. The most powerful learning experience came during his third week, when Amy arranged for Tyler to shadow Marcus Smith, a veteran coordinator who had been working with at-risk youth for over a decade. Marcus was a former college football player whose own career had been cut short by injury, and his approach to mentorship combined gentle guidance with unflinching honesty about the realities these young people faced. Their first stop was Roosevelt High School in Charlotte's East Side, an institution that served one of the city's most economically challenged neighborhoods. The building showed its age through cracked concrete steps and windows that bore the scars of too many budget cuts, but the energy inside was vibrant and determined. Tyler followed Marcus into a classroom where 15 teenagers sat in a loose circle, their body language ranging from cautious interest to outright skepticism. "Everyone, I want you to meet Tyler Donaldson," Marcus announced with the easy confidence of someone comfortable commanding attention. "Tyler's going to be working with our program, and he's got a story I think you'll find interesting." Tyler looked around the circle, taking in faces that reflected the beautiful diversity of urban America, African American, Latino, Asian, and white teenagers whose shared experience of economic struggle created bonds that transcended racial boundaries. Some met his gaze directly, sizing him up with the instant assessment skills that life had taught them. Others stared at their phones or out the window, having learned that most adult promises were eventually broken. "I don't know how much Marcus told you about me," Tyler began, settling into the empty chair that had been provided for him. "But I grew up about an hour from here in Wilmington. When I was your age, I thought I had everything figured out. I was a basketball player, a pretty good one, and I was convinced that my life was going to follow a straight line from high school to college to the NBA." A few heads turned in his direction, the mention of basketball creating the first spark of genuine interest. In communities where sports often represented the most visible path to success, athletic achievement commanded immediate respect and attention. "The thing is," Tyler continued, "life doesn't always follow the plan we make for it. I got hurt during my senior year, tore up my knee so badly that all those college scholarships disappeared overnight. Suddenly the future I had been so sure about just vanished." Denise Strong, a 17-year-old with intelligent eyes and an air of premature adulthood, raised her hand slightly. "So what did you do?" Tyler appreciated the directness of the question and the genuine curiosity behind it. "I felt sorry for myself for a while. Then I got a job at a manufacturing plant, got married, had kids, and tried to build a different kind of life. For a long time, that worked pretty well. But then the plant closed, my wife got sick, and suddenly I found myself facing problems I never could have imagined." He paused, scanning the faces around him and seeing recognition in several pairs of eyes. These kids understood financial instability and family crisis in ways that many adults never would. Their nodding heads and focused attention told him that his story was resonating with their own experiences. "3 weeks ago, I was about to lose my house," Tyler said, allowing vulnerability to creep into his voice. "I had no job, no money, and no idea how I was going to survive. I felt like a complete failure, like everything I had worked for was meaningless." Edwin Adams, a tall basketball player whose posture suggested both athletic ability and defensive wariness, leaned forward slightly. "What changed?" Tyler smiled, remembering his own shock at discovering Michael Jordan's involvement in his rescue. An old rival from high school, someone I used to play basketball against, found out about my situation and decided to help. He paid off all my debts and offered me this job. Who was it? Several voices asked simultaneously, the teenagers' natural curiosity overcoming their carefully maintained cool. Michael Jordan, Tyler replied simply, enjoying the moment of stunned silence that followed his revelation. The room erupted in excited chatter as the kids processed this information. Michael Jordan was more than just a basketball legend to these young people. He was a symbol of excellence and success that transcended sports. The idea that he would personally intervene to help someone in trouble added a mythical quality to Tyler's story that captured their imaginations. "No way," Denise said, her skepticism warring with obvious fascination. "You're telling us that Michael Jordan just showed up and saved you?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Tyler replied. "But here's the thing that took me a while to understand. He didn't save me because I was special or because I deserved it more than anyone else. He saved me because he remembered that we used to compete against each other, and he knew that sometimes good people end up in bad situations through no fault of their own." Marcus, who had been quietly observing the interaction, spoke up for the first time. "Tyler's here because we believe that everyone deserves a second chance, and everyone has something valuable to contribute. But second chances only work if you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding." The conversation that followed was unlike anything Tyler had expected. These teenagers, who had every reason to be cynical about adult promises and motivational speeches, engaged with his story on a level that was both personal and profound. They asked about his feelings during the darkest periods of his financial crisis, wanted to know how he had maintained hope when everything seemed hopeless, and wondered whether his experience had changed his perspective on success and failure. Barbara Jackson, a quiet girl who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion, finally spoke up during the last few minutes of their time together. "Do you think things happen for a reason? Like, maybe you went through all that trouble so you could end up here helping us?" The question struck Tyler with unexpected force, suggesting a level of philosophical sophistication that contradicted assumptions many adults made about teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds. "I don't know if everything happens for a reason," he replied thoughtfully. "But I do think we can choose to find meaning in our experiences, especially the difficult ones. If my struggles help me understand what you're going through and maybe offer some useful guidance, then maybe they weren't just random suffering." As the session ended and the teenagers began filing out of the classroom, several stopped to shake Tyler's hand or offer words of encouragement. Edwin Adams, the basketball player, lingered after the others had left. "Mr. Donaldson," he said, his voice carrying a maturity that seemed beyond his 17 years, "I just want you to know that hearing your story gives me hope. I've been thinking that if things don't work out with basketball, my life is basically over, but maybe there are other ways to have a meaningful life." Tyler felt a surge of satisfaction that had nothing to do with his own circumstances and everything to do with the possibility that his experience might help this young man avoid some of the despair that had nearly consumed him. "Edwin, basketball might work out for you or it might not, but either way, you're going to be fine. You're too smart and too determined to let one setback define your entire future." During the drive back to Charlotte, Marcus provided feedback on Tyler's first real interaction with the program's participants. "You did something really important back there," he said, as they navigated the afternoon traffic. "You showed those kids that failure isn't permanent and that successful people aren't fundamentally different from them. A lot of our participants have never met an adult who was willing to admit to making mistakes or facing serious problems." Tyler absorbed this feedback while watching the landscape change from urban neighborhoods to suburban developments to rural farmland. Each environment represented different challenges and opportunities for the young people the foundation served, but the common thread was the need for adult mentors who could offer both practical guidance and emotional support. That evening, Tyler called Michael Jordan to report on his first day in the field. The basketball legend listened intently as Tyler described his interactions with the teenagers and the insights he had gained about the foundation's approach to youth development. "It sounds like you're finding your rhythm," Michael observed. "How do you feel about the work?" Tyler considered the question carefully before responding. "I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters. For the first time in years, I went to bed last night excited about waking up the next morning." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," Michael replied, "because this is just the beginning. We've got plans to expand the program into rural communities, where kids face different but equally serious challenges. If you're up for it, I'd like you to help us develop those initiatives." As Tyler hung up the phone, he realized that his transformation was still ongoing. The desperate man who had sat in a coffee shop 3 weeks earlier, overwhelmed by debt and defeat, was continuing to evolve into someone with purpose, confidence, and the ability to make a positive difference in other people's lives. The journey from despair to hope had been sudden and dramatic, but the journey from hope to meaningful action was proving to be equally rewarding and far more sustainable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to help young people realize their potential. Tyler went to sleep that night with the profound satisfaction of a man who had discovered that sometimes the most meaningful victories come not from achieving your original dreams, but from finding the courage to embrace the unexpected gifts that life occasionally provides. 6 months into his new role with the Michael Jordan Foundation, Tyler had developed a rhythm that felt both natural and purposeful. His calendar was filled with visits to schools, community centers, and youth programs across North Carolina, each location presenting unique challenges and opportunities to connect with young people who needed guidance, encouragement, or simply someone who understood their struggles. The work was demanding, both emotionally and physically, but it provided the kind of deep satisfaction that Tyler had never experienced in any previous job. On a crisp October morning, Tyler found himself driving through the mountains of western North Carolina, heading toward Asheville for what would prove to be one of the most significant encounters of his new career. The foundation had recently partnered with Mountain View Community Center to establish a mentorship program for teenagers in the rural communities surrounding the city, areas where economic opportunities were scarce, and many young people felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. The community center occupied a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that showed the signs of economic transition. Some buildings had been renovated into trendy shops and restaurants, while others remained empty or underutilized, their boarded windows and peeling paint telling stories of businesses that hadn't survived recent economic changes. Tyler parked his foundation-provided vehicle and walked toward the entrance, carrying the leather portfolio that had become his constant companion, filled with program materials, contact information, and the handwritten notes he made after each interaction with program participants. Inside the community center, Tyler was greeted by Sarah Moore, the facilities director, and a woman whose energy and commitment had made the partnership possible. Sarah was in her mid-40s, with graying hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of worn hands that spoke of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. Her office was decorated with photographs of successful program graduates and thank you letters from families whose lives had been touched by the center's programs. "Tyler, I'm so glad you could make it up here today," Sarah said, her accent carrying the musical cadences of the Appalachian Mountains. "We've got 15 kids signed up for today's session, and several of them have been asking about you since we announced your visit." Tyler had learned that each group of teenagers brought their own dynamics and challenges. Urban kids often dealt with violence and drugs, while suburban participants might struggle with academic pressure and social media-driven anxiety. Rural teenagers faced a different set of obstacles: geographic isolation, limited educational opportunities, and the economic reality that many of their communities offered few paths to prosperity. "Tell me about this group," Tyler said, as Sarah led him through hallways lined with colorful artwork created by program participants. "What kinds of challenges are they facing?" Sarah's expression grew more serious as she considered her response. "A lot of these kids come from families that have been in these mountains for generations, but the traditional ways of making a living, farming, logging, small manufacturing, aren't providing the same opportunities they once did. Some of their parents are struggling with addiction, others are working multiple low-wage jobs just to get by. The kids are caught between wanting to honor their roots and needing to find new ways to build successful lives." They entered a large room where teenagers were scattered across mismatched chairs and couches, their conversations creating a comfortable buzz of adolescent energy. Tyler immediately noticed the differences between this group and the urban kids he'd been working with. These teenagers seemed more comfortable with silence, more attuned to the natural rhythms of conversation, and less influenced by the rapid-fire digital communication that characterized many of their city counterparts. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Tyler Donaldson," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of working with young people. "Tyler's here from the Michael Jordan Foundation to talk with you about opportunities and possibilities." Tyler settled into a chair that had been placed in the center of the loose circle, taking a moment to make eye contact with each participant. He saw faces that reflected the ethnic heritage of Appalachian communities, predominantly white, but with traces of Cherokee ancestry and the kind of weathered features that came from generations of outdoor work. These kids had grown up with different reference points than their urban counterparts, but their fundamental needs for guidance and encouragement were remarkably similar. "I want to start by asking you a question," Tyler began, his voice pitched to encourage participation rather than intimidate. "How many of you feel like you're stuck, like the place where you grew up doesn't have room for the dreams you're carrying around?" Nearly every hand in the room went up, some hesitantly and others with emphatic certainty. The response confirmed what Tyler had suspected. Geographic isolation could be just as limiting as economic disadvantage, creating barriers that were psychological as much as practical. Corey Anderson, a 16-year-old with calloused hands and intelligent eyes, spoke first. "It's not that I don't love these mountains," he said, his voice carrying the careful thoughtfulness that Tyler had learned to associate with rural teenagers. "But it feels like if you want to do anything with your life, you have to leave everything. And everyone you care about behind." Tyler nodded, recognizing the dilemma that faced many young people in similar communities. "That's a real challenge, Corey. Tell me what you're interested in, what you think you might want to do with your life." "I like working with computers, programming and stuff like that, but there aren't any tech companies around here, and I don't know if I'm smart enough for the kind of schools where you learn that stuff." The familiar refrain of self-doubt struck Tyler with force, not because it was unfounded, but because it was so unnecessary. Corey's careful articulation and thoughtful approach to the question suggested exactly the kind of analytical thinking that made for successful programmers. But without exposure to role models or opportunities, he couldn't see his own potential. "Let me tell you something about being smart enough," Tyler said, leaning forward to emphasize his point. 3 months ago, I met a kid in Charlotte who thought he wasn't smart enough for college because his family had never had anyone graduate from high school. Last week, I got a text from him saying he'd been accepted to NC State with a partial scholarship. Sometimes the biggest barrier isn't ability, It's believing that ability matters. Dana Jackson, a 17-year-old girl with the kind of quiet intensity that often masked profound depth, raised her hand tentatively. But how do you know if you're just fooling yourself? Like, how do you know the difference between having realistic dreams and just being naive? The question revealed the sophisticated thinking that Tyler had learned to expect from teenagers who had grown up in communities where economic hardship was a constant reality. These kids had witnessed enough disappointment to be naturally cautious about hope, but they still carried dreams that deserved nurturing rather than discouragement. "That's one of the best questions I've heard in months," Tyler replied, genuine admiration in his voice. "And I think the answer is that you don't know for sure until you try. But here's what I've learned. Most people fail, not because they aimed too high, but because they aimed too low or didn't aim at all." He paused, looking around the circle of faces that were now focused intently on his words. "I want to tell you about my own experience with realistic dreams versus naive hopes. When I was your age, I thought my future was completely mapped out. I was a basketball player, a good one, and I was absolutely certain that I would play in college and then professionally. That seemed realistic to me because I had evidence. I could compete with anyone in the state, including a guy named Michael Jordan." The mention of the basketball legend's name created the same electric response Tyler had witnessed in every group he addressed. These rural teenagers might have different cultural references than their urban counterparts. But Michael Jordan's significance transcended all boundaries. "But then I got injured, and suddenly my realistic dream became impossible. For years, I thought that meant I was destined for disappointment. I got a job at a factory, got married, had kids, and convinced myself that I was being realistic by not expecting too much from life." Tyler's voice took on a more reflective tone as he continued. "The thing is, I was wrong about what realistic meant. I thought it meant accepting limitations and not taking risks. But what I learned recently is that being realistic means acknowledging both your challenges and your potential, then working hard to tip the balance in favor of potential." Rachel White, a 15-year-old who had been sketching in a notebook while listening, looked up with sudden interest. "So how do you know what your potential actually is?" "You discover it by trying things that scare you a little bit," Tyler replied. "You volunteer for projects that seem too hard. You apply for programs that seem too competitive. You have conversations with people who seem too important to talk to someone like you. Most of the time, you'll discover that you're more capable than you realized." The conversation that followed was unlike any Tyler had experienced in his months with the foundation. These rural teenagers brought a different perspective to questions of opportunity and limitation, shaped by communities where self-reliance was valued, but where economic options were genuinely constrained. They asked about practical matters: how to research colleges they had never heard of, how to pay for education when their families had no money, how to maintain connections to home while pursuing opportunities that might take them far away. But they also asked deeper questions about identity and belonging, about the tension between honoring their heritage and embracing change, about the responsibility they felt toward communities that had shaped them but might not be able to sustain them economically. Tyler found himself drawing on aspects of his own experience that he had never articulated before, insights about the relationship between roots and growth that his recent struggles had clarified. As the session wound down, Daniel Tate, a quiet 18-year-old who had listened intently but said little, finally spoke up. "Mr. Donaldson, do you think it's possible to give back to your community even if you have to leave it to build a career?" The question struck Tyler as profoundly important, reflecting the kind of civic responsibility that these young people had absorbed from their mountain communities. Daniel, I think giving back to your community is exactly what you should be thinking about. But sometimes the best way to help the place you're from is to go out into the world, gain skills and experience, and then find ways to bring those resources back home. Tyler paused, struck by a sudden realization about his own journey. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I had to leave Wilmington in a sense to find this opportunity, but the work I'm doing now is bringing resources and support back to communities across North Carolina, including places like this one. As the teenagers began filing out of the community center, several stopped to shake Tyler's hand or ask follow-up questions about specific programs and opportunities. Sarah Moore walked with him to his car, her expression reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed genuine connection and learning. "You've given those kids something precious today," she said as they stood in the parking lot, surrounded by the magnificent autumn colors of the Appalachian Mountains. "You've shown them that their dreams don't have to be small just because they come from a small place." Tyler drove away from Asheville with the profound sense that his work was evolving beyond what he had originally imagined. These rural communities presented challenges and opportunities that were different from urban environments, but the fundamental need for guidance and encouragement was universal. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that his role wasn't just about helping individual teenagers, it was about strengthening communities by helping young people see possibilities they might not have recognized on their own. The mountain roads wound through valleys, painted in brilliant reds and golds, each turn revealing new vistas that reminded Tyler of the beauty that existed in unexpected places. Like his own life, these communities held potential that wasn't always visible from a distance, but revealed itself to those willing to look more closely and invest in what they found. The drive back to Charlotte took Tyler through small towns and rural communities that had become increasingly familiar during his months with the foundation. Each place told its own story of adaptation and resilience, of people finding ways to thrive despite economic challenges that would have overwhelmed less determined communities. As he navigated the winding mountain roads, Tyler reflected on how profoundly his understanding of success and failure had evolved since that desperate morning when he had first met Daniel Lopez at the coffee shop. His phone rang as he reached the outskirts of Charlotte, the familiar ringtone indicating a call from Michael Jordan. These conversations had become a regular part of Tyler's routine, providing opportunities to discuss program developments, share insights from field visits, and maintain the connection that had made his transformation possible. "Tyler, how did things go in Asheville today?" Michael's voice carried the focused intensity that Tyler had learned to associate with his former rival's approach to any endeavor that mattered to him. "Better than I expected," Tyler replied, pulling into a rest area where he could give the conversation his full attention. These rural kids face different challenges than the urban teenagers we've been working with, but they're just as hungry for guidance and opportunity. Maybe more so because they feel so isolated from the kinds of resources that city kids take for granted. Michael was quiet for a moment, processing the information in the methodical way that had made him such an effective leader, both on and off the basketball court. "Mars, tell me more about what you observed. I'm thinking we might need to modify our approach for rural communities." Tyler spent the next 20 minutes describing his interactions with the Asheville teenagers, emphasizing their combination of intelligence and self-doubt, their deep connection to place and family, and their need for practical guidance about navigating educational and career opportunities that felt foreign to their communities. Michael listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed his sophisticated understanding of youth development and community dynamics. "What you're describing sounds like an opportunity to expand our impact," Michael said when Tyler finished his report. But it also sounds like we need to develop new partnerships and programs specifically designed for rural environments. Are you interested in leading that initiative? The question caught Tyler off guard, representing a level of responsibility and trust that exceeded anything he had imagined when he first accepted the youth coordinator position. Michael, I'm honored that you would consider me for something like that, but I'm not sure I have the qualifications to design new programs. Tyler, let me stop you right there, Michael replied, his voice carrying the firm conviction that had characterized his most important speeches as a player and businessman. 6 months ago, you thought you didn't have the qualifications to work with teenagers. 3 months ago, you probably didn't think you could handle the urban programs we started you with. Now you're having insights about rural youth development that our PhD consultants missed completely. Tyler felt a familiar stirring of possibility, the same sensation he had experienced during his first meeting with Amy Guerra when she had described the foundation's work. But this opportunity represented something larger, not just the chance to help individual young people, but the possibility of creating systemic change that could benefit entire communities. What would something like that involve? Tyler asked, his mind already beginning to consider the practical implications of such an undertaking. We'd start by conducting a comprehensive assessment of rural communities across North Carolina, identifying the specific challenges and opportunities that exist in different regions. Then we'd develop programming that addresses those needs while building on existing community strengths. Eventually, we might expand the model to other states with similar demographics. The scope of what Michael was describing was both exciting and intimidating. Tyler tried to imagine himself leading teams of researchers and program developers, making presentations to foundation boards and community leaders, taking responsibility for initiatives that could affect thousands of young people across multiple states. I'd want Amy Guerra to work with you on this, Michael continued. She has the administrative and research experience you'd need, and you have the field insights and community credibility that would make the programs authentic and effective. It would be a true partnership, building on both of your strengths. Tyler realized that his hesitation wasn't really about his qualifications. It was about the fear of taking on responsibilities that might exceed his capacity to deliver results. But hadn't he felt the same way about every significant challenge he had faced during the past 6 months? Each time, he had discovered capabilities he didn't know he possessed and developed skills he had never imagined needing. When would you want to start something like this? Tyler asked, the shift in his language indicating acceptance before he had consciously made the decision. We could begin with a planning phase next month, if you're ready for it. I'm thinking we'd spend the winter months conducting research and development, then launch pilot programs in the spring. By next fall, we could have a comprehensive rural youth initiative ready for statewide implementation. As Tyler absorbed the timeline and scope of what was being proposed, he felt the same mixture of excitement and terror that had characterized every major transition in his recent life. But underneath those emotions was something steadier and more sustaining, confidence born of experience, the knowledge that he had successfully navigated challenges that once seemed impossible. Michael, I have to ask you something, Tyler said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. Why do you keep believing in me? I mean, I'm grateful beyond words for everything you've done, but I sometimes wonder if you see something in me that I don't see in myself. Michael's laugh was warm and genuine, carrying echoes of the competitive camaraderie they had shared as teenagers. Tyler, do you remember our game against each other during our junior year? The one where you scored 32 points and we went into double overtime? Tyler smiled at the memory, one of the few from his playing days that remained purely positive, unmarked by the disappointment that had followed his injury. I remember you scored 34 and hit the winning shot with 3 seconds left. That's right. But here's what I remember most about that game. It wasn't the points or the final score. It was watching you figure out ways to stay competitive, even when everything seemed to be going against you. You had foul trouble. Your best teammate got hurt, and the crowd was completely against you, but you kept finding new ways to impact the game. Michael paused, his voice taking on the reflective quality that Tyler had learned to associate with his most important insights. That's exactly what you've been doing with your life, Tyler. When basketball didn't work out, you found other ways to contribute. When the factory job ended, you figured out how to take care of your family. When Stephanie got sick, you found the strength to be her caregiver while dealing with impossible financial pressure. You think I'm seeing something in you that isn't there, but I'm just recognizing the same qualities I saw on that basketball court 25 years ago. The observation struck Tyler with unexpected force, reframing his struggles not as evidence of weakness or failure, but as demonstrations of resilience and adaptability. It was a perspective he had never applied to his own experience, too focused on what he had lost to recognize what he had preserved and developed through adversity. The Rural Youth Initiative isn't charity, Tyler, Michael continued. It's an investment in someone who has proven he can perform under pressure and find solutions when conventional approaches don't work. Those are exactly the qualities we need for this kind of pioneering work. Tyler sat in the rest area parking lot as dusk settled over the North Carolina landscape, watching other travelers come and go while he processed the magnitude of what was being offered. 6 months earlier, he had been a desperate man with no prospects and no hope. Now he was being asked to lead an initiative that could affect the lives of thousands of young people while potentially serving as a model for similar programs across the country. I accept, Tyler said simply, the words carrying the weight of commitment and the lightness of possibility in equal measure. Outstanding, Michael replied, satisfaction evident in his voice. Amy will call you tomorrow to start planning the research phase. Tyler, I want you to know that this is just the beginning. If the rural initiative succeeds, and I believe it will, there are other opportunities we've been discussing that could expand your impact even further. After ending the call, Tyler remained in his car for several more minutes, watching the last light fade from the western sky while stars began to appear overhead. The silence was filled not with the desperate quiet of his lowest moments, but with the peaceful anticipation of someone who had found his calling and was ready to embrace whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. The drive home to Wilmington took him through communities that would soon become laboratories for the programs he would help design and implement. Each small town and rural crossroads represented potential partnerships and possibilities, places where young people were waiting for someone to show them that their dreams could be both ambitious and achievable. As Tyler pulled into his driveway, the same driveway where he had once sat surrounded by foreclosure notices and unpaid bills, he felt the profound satisfaction of a man who had discovered that redemption was not just possible, but repeatable, not just personal, but expandable, to include others who needed the same kind of second chance he had received. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to transform possibility into reality. But tonight, Tyler Donaldson went to sleep with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned that the most meaningful victories often come not from achieving your original dreams, but from discovering that life's unexpected gifts can be even more fulfilling than anything you ever planned for yourself. In small towns across rural North Carolina, teenagers were falling asleep with their own dreams and doubts, unaware that help was coming in the form of a man who understood both failure and redemption, and who was determined to ensure that their stories would be filled with more hope and fewer regrets than his own had been.